Welcome, folks, to another episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. I am your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything military and aviation. On the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, we interview some of the most fascinating and incredible pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. We want to hear the stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation events in their lives? Our purpose is to show how does the aviation world work and increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. Many of the stories you're going to hear on the Lesson from the Cockpit Show have never been told before, and today's one of those days where we have on a very special guest in episode 2, talking with Bo Smith, Navy A4, A7 pilot. He was a naval aviator during the Vietnam War, and he helped invent some of the tactics, techniques, and procedures used to hunt the surface-to-air missile sites and anti-aircraft defenses in Vietnam. He's also going to tell us about some of the other targets that they went after, like the Than Hoa Bridge, nicknamed the Dragon's Jaw. This episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show is sponsored financially by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are 4, 6, and 8 foot, very detailed profiles of famous aircraft printed on vinyl that you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. There's 143 ready to print, and we can also do custom work of your favorite plane with your name, tail number, and even your favorite weapons load on the aircraft. So go by wallpilot.com and take a look at some of these ready to print, or order a custom print from wallpilot.com. So grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, Episode 2 with Navy Captain Bo Smith, A4 and A7 pilot extraordinaire, as he talks about flying Iron Hand missions and other targets over North Vietnam.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something you can explain to the audience here, okay? What is Iron Hand and why is it so important?
Okay, Iron Hand is the Navy's term for anti-SAM warfare, where the Air Force mission is called a Wild Weasel mission. In the Air Force, it's flown in a 105, a two-seat 105. I don't know if they had F4 Wild Weasels, but they certainly had them.
Toward the end they did.
They had some F4 Wild Weasels. But you have a radar operator, EW operator in an airplane, and it's a two-seat airplane in the 1967 area, 1970s, two-seat. In the Navy, the Iron Hand mission was flown in single-seat A4s and A7s, and the single-seat pilot had to be trained in all this, identifying radars by their PRFs. The same things that the EW operator in the Wild Weasel had to do, the Navy was doing it with one pilot. You know, it did, and your mission, you were armed with a Shrike missile, anti-radiation missile, and some other, either a rocket like the Zuni rocket, or in 72, we had the Rockeyes, so that you could follow up AGM-45 Shrike with actually attacking the site itself. Actually 2 airplanes, because you're always flying in sections, and right on top of the SAM site. You got used to literally, my concept, my tactics for the 67 was to get well out in front and just be up there at 18,000 feet, be confident that they would not commit MiGs or SAMs to a section when they had 80 airplanes coming, or 60 airplanes. They were going to wait, and we never got engaged. I never got engaged directly by that SAM site. Now, if I'd have flown those tactics in 62, they would have ZSU-23'd me. They couldn't do it in 72. But in 67, we got right on top of them. And I've had 2 occasions, one in 72, and I talk about it in my memoir, and one in 67, where I did a down-the-throat strike shot at a SAM launched, and the guy who was the commander in the fan song shut off the fan song and detonated the missile right over the site. Boom. I saw it happen twice. You say, boy, this is really cool, because you know that SAM can't fly against, trying to prevent it from going to the strike group. And any way you could do it was fine for the same idea. If they could shoot a SAM up there and make you have to avoid it and not get to the target, they were successful, whether they shot you down or not. There weren't that many airplanes shot down with SAMs. Most of the airplanes were shot down
by guns,
37 millimeter in the target area at 4,000 and 5,000 feet. So that's where the danger was. But anyway, so Iron Hand missions, you're sitting there and you're kind of dueling with the air defense commander and what he's going to do. And the guy that was at Vin was really good. That guy learned to shoot the fan song, to basically shoot on spoon rest. And, he would get the target and he would go ahead and launch the missile and then come up with fan song. So there wouldn't be much fan song. He didn't use the fan song for the acquisition phase. He used spoon rest, not even fire cam. He got really good shots. He had very good shooting out of that. He was shooting off the top of a building at Vin. Lee Cole, who we lost in June 28th, I guess it was, 1967, was there at Vin. You'd think, Vin, no big deal. He was very good.
That's interesting. I had never heard that, Bo.
Yeah,
so he is firing on his long-range looking radar, saying, okay, here they come. They're out here, launches the missile, and then turns the fan song on, which is the target tracking radar.
He has to track with it.
In your headsets, you're hearing spoon rest and not knowing, and then you don't hear.
You hear the APR-27 to say there's a missile in the air. You say, how can that be? Well, that's because, but he probably used some flap wheel, conical sand to get the altitude. Yeah. He's getting that missile up, but he can't do anything with it. It's dead until the fan song comes on. So it's a tricky maneuver. They also learned, the Russians came in and did, a lot of people don't know this, but when we had the bombing halt, the Russians came and did a whole lot of training with their SA-2 commanders.
This is a 68, 69 time frame.
Yeah. And so they were a lot better in 72 than they were in 67. They had gotten all this training. It was interesting. In Rolling Thunder, you were not allowed to bomb SAM site because they thought there were Russians there. They didn't want to kill Russians. Well, screw that. What a stupid idea that is. The Russians are taking their chances. They're down in a war zone. We didn't attack airfields. It was just, you couldn't
crazy
attack.
restrictions.
Of course, you had the circles around Hanoi and Haiphong. You couldn't recce in those. Yeah. You couldn't hit. Of course, you never were allowed to bomb the dikes or something. You don't want to wipe out the economy of the country. You want to be able to do something. But I don't know anybody that bombed a dike. Now, I know someone that did a CBU on a Russian ship in Haiphong Harbor. He's a 105 pilot. But
Jack Broughton talks about that in his book.
Yeah, that was Ted Tolman. And he came out there and he gave color gun camera film to the wing commander. He said, okay, I did it. This is it. I dropped the CBU.
And Tolman had good reason for doing it, too. Yeah. They're shooting at him.
So he did it. And the wing commander trashed the film or something, and when it came out, he's the guy that took the hits for it, not Ted Tolman. Yeah, he's a great. Ted Tolman was a great guy. If you are going to pick somebody you're going to have as your major that you're going to fly on as a Navy lieutenant, Ted Tolman or Sam Martin were people you want to fly with. I had a really good time flying with another guy named George Bogert, who ended up going in the Air National Guard. George and I flew a night flight, and I did a night formation landing in the 105, and Harry Sher-Watts observed it, and we got yelled at for doing it, but at the same time, it was kind of a wink from Sher that it was a really good night formation landing. Joe Doolan was the DO in the 45 19th, and he had flown the F4 on the forestall exchange. So when I came in there, if a student was having problems landing the 105, I got him, not Ted Tolman. Because Ted Tolman, he could grease that 105 on, but he couldn't necessarily tell a T-38 first lieutenant how to do it. And I just took airspeed off.
Yeah.
There was a tape. There was an angle of attack tape,
Yeah.
and just have them land with a little bit of power. And once they learned how to do that, because that's how you do formation landings anyway, once they learned how to control, because we had students, T-38 students, disappearing over the hill in the roundout. Once they learned, then they could gradually put more speed on, and they learned, because it was just an eyeball thing. It's very hard to do that. When you get a Navy type approach where it's all angle of attack and line up, you just maintain that attitude. You just, in a T-38 or the 105, you have to cushion it a little bit because you can't go prang it on there with it. But you can control the airplane that way, and you feel like you're in charge. You're not just drifting along. I got the landing cases, and it worked pretty well. Yeah, you can tell I'm talking about all this 105 time whilst as a Navy pilot, but it was good. My Ray Thomas, who was a very talented lieutenant who did the pocket money, the mining planning and all that, what did he do? After there, he went to A-7Ds in the Air Force, following my kind of career pattern. Because I was able to go, for the first 15 years of my career, I was flying the whole time. Stayed away from Washington. Yeah. But anyway, I don't know how. I've never got on the Northeast Railroad from Hanoi. And I did come in from the West, though. It was a little target, and Possum Terrell, who was a SPAD pilot, he could DR nav. Nobody DR navs anymore. And he took us across Route Pack 2, all up around, and we rolled right in on the target, northwest of Hanoi. Amazing. All DR. I would try and cheat because there were TAC ends along there. I was trying to keep track of where they were. No, those SPAD pilots, they could DR navigate.
That's the A1 Skyraider, really, isn't it? And you know what? That's a big airplane. So is a 105 Weasel. We've got tail number 440 F-105 Wild Weasel G model that's at the museum up here at Hill Air Force Base. One of the cool things they do here, Bo, is they have what's called Open Cockpit Day. And I was there one day when they had the Wild Weasel. Both cockpits were open in the 105 Weasel. You get to see the front seat. The front seat of the Weasel was pretty much the same, but the back had all of the displays, all of the stuff, for figuring out where the electronic warfare officers figure everything out. And again, the beeps and squeaks you hear in the headset and everything. An amazing stuff. So, hey, you mentioned a mission where you're getting shot at and a MiG. You said it was one of your DFC missions. Why don't you talk about that real quick? Well, or take as long as you want. Take as long as you want, because
we were scheduled to fly with Mark 36 destructors. And Mark 36 destructor is a B-50. Well, you could get a 1,000-pound destructor, I think, but these were 500-pound bombs that had instead of having a fuse in it, it had this proximity device. It was delivered with snake eye fins so that it slowed down and didn't destruct when it hit. And it would go in the mud where a bridge was down. If a repair person came with even the nails in boots, but if these people were barefoot, but if they had a metal tool, when it got to the closest area, it went off. So when you use destructors, when bridges were down, they were to make it difficult to repair the bridge. This was a big strike. There was iron hands and flak suppressors. Some reason I was flying the last section destructor guys. Mm-hmm. And I was flying with a guy, Steve Smith, who I'd never flown with before. He wasn't one of the 10 guys. So I told Steve, okay, we're rolling, we're the tail end Charlie, and we're going to pull off different from everybody else, Even if everybody pulls the right, this is Haiduong, which is halfway between Haiphong and Hanoi. If you pull off to the left, you're pulling toward Hanoi, which is not great to do that. Yeah. So anyway, I must have been too low because I felt getting hit, and I didn't think I got hit with some kind of big machine gun, whatever it was. Right away, the fire warning light came on. But the engine was running fine, so I didn't worry about it. I pull off a target, and I told Steve Smith, he didn't lose me, but he was pretty far away. I'm going pretty fast, right? I mean, I'm going 600 knots, and this is an A4, but I'm moving. His job to keep up with me. I'm not pulling the power back for him. He's a mile back. So I told him, okay, engine's running fine. He tells me you're trailing smoke. You're on fire. I said, well, then I said the fire warning light went out. It did. It went out, but it burned through is what happened. System. I'm hauling ass, and I'm over the Keenan airfield, and I'm at about 4,000 or 5,000 feet, and I'm going close to 600 knots. Coming opposed to me at 3,000 feet were two MiG-17s, and one was silver, and one was camouflaged. The silver one was probably a Russian airplane, and with a North Vietnamese pilot. Okay, but there was no way at Keenan they could engage me. I mean, I'm heading to the water at 600 knots. They're coming the opposite direction. By the time they turn, I'm over. By the time they turn, I'm over the water. So they're not doing it. Then I see their afterburners light, and they're going after the wingman. He's a mile behind me. So I have no choice but to engage. So I turn around and I engage the MiG-17s, but we went around a couple of times, and I don't know where Steve Smith was, off somewhere. But the fight, I tried to get the fight to keep going southeast because they weren't going to feel very comfortable. So pretty soon we got southeast of Keenan. They could see the water. So nobody shot at anybody. On that particular flight, it's written up as 18 MiGs against 24 A4s. Because it turns out there were all kinds of engagements. The ADIS guy is calling out all these MiGs. Nobody sees them. Bar captain, get to them. Our F-8s never saw them. One of the engagements was four MiG-17s against the 4 flak suppressors in VA-34 that had Zuni rockets. And it turns out the MiGs overshot them, and the A4s were able to shoot Zunis at these MiG-17s. They got no hits. Then the A4 guys, they ends up with a Zuni pod. It's like a barn door. So they have to jettison the Zuni pods and hope they don't hit the tail, to get the hell out of there. There are like 3 or 4 engagements going on, and mine is just a 2v2. But it made some Air Force book that had the Charlie from Peanuts in there. There was this Air Force organization of people that had MiG engagements. We got in that book. But, the Intrepid in 66, though, had the famous 4 MiG-17s against 4 Spads. And they got the MiG-17s. There was one confirmed, one probable, one possible out of 4 MiGs, 3 of them.
Against a prop-driven airplane.
Because they overshot. And if you overshoot a Spad, the Spad's got all those World War II forward-firing guns on rockets, and it just blew them away. I mean, it was just. So I wrote that up in my memoir, but there's a real good website with all those guys. And
it is. Your website is fantastic.
One of those guys from that MiG group that shot was in Val 4 and the OV-10s, and he got killed with a single bullet through the OV-10 cockpit flying with Val 4. And that's written up in that's the Flying Black Ponies. Yeah. This is a great book. This is like McHale's Navy. And Admiral Zumwalt set this up because the Navy was operating riverine forces. This is like 68, 70. Mm-hmm. The Navy is operating the riverine forces, and they had helos, which was fine. Admiral Zumwalt borrowed 25 OV-10s from the Marines and set up this squadron. And this book's all about it. The guy who was in VA-82 in 1972, Charlie Sapp, was a plank owner in this squadron. He knew more about fast mover facts, and I talk about how bad we didn't take advantage of his knowledge at all. This book is very interesting, not just the missions. I mean, not only did they help the ravine guys, they did all kinds of seal extractions in Cambodia and all kinds of stuff. Very interesting. The other book I have here that is a must-read book is this Once a Warrior King, written by David Donovan. Now, David Donovan, I know, and he's a South Georgia guy. He wrote another book about living in South Georgia. This is about MAC-V. These guys, that teams of 5, a captain, a first lieutenant, and 3 NCO weapons guys, or 2 weapons guys and a medic. Well, they would go and they'd work with the mayor of a town, and they would train the South Vietnamese to oppose the North Vietnamese, or with 5 guys. 5 guys.
Amazing.
And they did it, and they were considered, when they say warrior king, is because the mayor considered that captain, because the captain had so much power at his disposal. Great book. I have tried to get to learn more about the ground side, on the potential receivers of close air support. So we had that line period of close air support in the Delta. Of course, the Val 4 hadn't been set up yet. Val 4 wasn't set up till 68. So they weren't there. But we were really good close air support platform because we were such good bombers. And we had 2 SPAD squadrons. 2 SPAD squadrons. We could carry more ordnance off that deck on the Intrepid than any carrier because we didn't have any fighters. We had a deck full of attack airplanes. We had 2 SPAD squadrons and 2 A4 squadrons. That's all on that Dixie Station carrier.
And the SPAD A1 Skyraider has a lot of hard points to carry weapons on it. A lot of stuff. And carry heavy bombs like 750s. And I've seen pictures of them carrying 750-pound bombs, 500-pound bombs, rocket pods, all kinds of things on those airplanes.
We had a bomb load on the A4 where we had a 2,000-pound bomb on the center line and 2 1,000-pound bombs on each wing. We had
my God.
4,000 pounds of bombs in an airplane that weighed 10,000 pounds and had fuel of 5,400 pounds. That's all you could. If you didn't have a fuel tank, you had 5,400 pounds of fuel. But you're rolling in on the target and you're dropping 4,000 pounds of bombs off your airplane. That airplane, and it was clean, so no turds, no murders.
It's all bombs.
A clean A4. You were smoking coming off of there. We came back to the carrier with only 1,000 pounds of fuel on those missions. Those were .7s carrying 4,000 pounds of bombs off of an A4.
And see, that's amazing because you mentioned just a little bit ago, during your mission where you're doing that seed mission, Devastator mission, you're going 600 knots in an A4, and that's a non-afterburning engine. That's hauling.
It's such a clean little airplane.
Of course, it's not a very big airplane either, but I didn't know the only thing weighed only 10,000 pounds. That's just holy smokes.
The maximum gross weight for an A4 and a Cat was 24,000 pounds. Mm-hmm. And we got close to that with a tanker configuration because you could get a 3,000-pound tank. And when you got a 3,000-pound tank on the center line and the buddy stores, you're actually a little bit over. That's not a fun catch shot. If you over-rotate, you go in the water. If you under-rotate, you go in the water. And the only chance you have is clean it all off, jettison everything. And that happened several times.
Punch it all off.
Enough of this 3,000-pound tank stuff. It wasn't worth it. Normally, we had a centerline tank, so you had 7,400 pounds. Then we had our 2 TERs. We would just carry, 4 bombs, or we went through the bombing where we were running out of bombs, where we'd go over the beach with 2 82s and an 81. And that was more. I know there was some carriers that flew with 1 bomb because they were going to keep the sorties count up. They didn't have enough ordnance.
That's something I've read about too, Bo, and people today they go like, what? A bomb shortage. The United States actually went through a bomb shortage, and it wasn't just the Navy that was having a problem. It was everybody having a problem. Yeah. We didn't have enough bombs, and most of the bombs, had like 1944, 45 stenciled on them,
We had one good bomb that we had from World War II was a 220-pound ring frag bomb where the casing was cut in rings. Great anti-personnel bomb, and it weighed, it didn't weigh 250 pounds. It weighed like 225, 220.
I've never heard of that.
220 ring frag bomb. Then we had the M17, which is a big sucker, non-thermally coated, and we carry those on the A7. We just didn't have enough bombs. I remember, when President Trump said, if he had been John McCain, he would have refused to fly. Well, fine, they just would have sent him back to States. Or the CEO of the carrier refused to fly. They just relieve them. That's a stupid comment. We all carried non-thermally coated bombs because that's all there were for a while. Even now, when we're giving stuff to Ukraine, what we're really doing is we're giving them the old stuff and we're building new stuff for ourselves. So that's what's really.
And a lot of people don't understand that. I've heard other people commentate on that. Hey, you have to understand the stuff that the Ukrainians are getting is like 30 years old.
Yeah, or the F-16s. If you're going to give F-16s, well, the guys who are the Poles that are getting the F-16s, they're giving Soviet MiG-29s to them or something like that. The NATO countries are getting newer fighters and they're training and giving Ukrainian. And people don't understand. When you get a new airplane, let's say the Ukrainians are getting F-16s, they're not going to go in the field for a year because they got to train maintenance guys and they got to train pilots and all that's what the Poles are doing. All that training's going on in Poland. There are a lot of Air Force guys out there doing the training. I guarantee you. It just takes a while and once he gets F-16s, he's going to start bombing Russian targets. What do you got the F-16s for? They're not going to be defensive. They're going to go out there.
Hey, talk a little bit about, you were in England for a little while. You went to the school and you stayed there and got to talk to a lot of different countries and do some things there. Talk a little bit about what that was like being like air attaché and working with all these other governments.
When I went there, I checked in at Grosvenor Square. Which is where the embassy is, and that's where my person I checked in with. And one thing was, so I checked in January. So I had to leave. Before Linebacker 2 because I had orders to be at Greenwich in January, and I was going to go to have Christmas. So I had to go to Jacksonville, pick up my family, go up to Duxbury, Massachusetts, Christmas with them. Go to England with my 1,000 pounds of travel stuff. And we didn't bother taking anything else because we were living in quarters and we had to learn how to keep the fire going in the lounge and with all that kind of stuff. When I checked in with this guy, he says, "Oh, you're not going to Greenwich. You're going to Bracknell." And it doesn't start till, and what they do in January and February, they take the Commonwealth countries where English is a second language, and they teach basically English in January. So the first period where everybody's together is in March. So I said, "Well, what do I do?" He says, "Enjoy 2 months." So we literally learned how to, because it wasn't centrally heated. Quarters they had for the Americans, though, had 220 because we had to have refrigerators. The English didn't. They had cold closets. They went, it was really amazing. And even, there's two kinds of English officers there's the ones who are serving at the pleasure of the Queen and take no salary, who are Lord McFadden. And then there's the Scott guy, squadron leader Ross, who they may not be able to afford lettuce that week. And you got the two kinds. You got the aristocracy that's serving, whose families have served in every war, and they serve the Queen. And then you have the guys who are the normal everyday guys. It was interesting. So we had like 140 students. 90 of them were Brits, and the rest were foreign countries. And we had Bracknell, an ex-MiG pilot from Afghanistan. We had 2 Indians. There was a MiG-21 pilot, Jordanian, who was director of ops in an F-102 squadron in Jordan. He became a very good friend of mine.
F-102s, wow.
We ended up with the guy that became chief of staff of the Swiss Air Force, Paul Luthold, who was a good Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Vander Faisal was a student. He had a suite of rooms in London, and he had armored minis that drove out to Bracknell every day. They didn't live with us peons. My neighbor across the street, Bruce Jackman, was a Gurkha officer. I learned about the Gurkhas. And he had all kinds of combat experience.
Oh, fierce guys, fierce warriors.
And he had been all, in Africans, and there's little countries. The Gurkhas are their military, and they're fighting all kinds of civil wars. He's had experience with that. One of our field trips was in Berlin, and I was at the bar, and some local German guy harassing me, and that guy was through the freight of the glass window in the front of the bar in an instant by Jackman, and he was the quiet. That guy was something else. His wife was from Texas. So I learned that, the purpose of the class, the purpose of the course was social. No question to establish these tiles. But we did have the lecture series. We have some guy talk and some air vice marshal in charge of intelligence. And these guys would love to question. They had questions. I asked this Navy captain when I went through, what can I talk about and what can't I talk about? They said, don't worry about it. Just talk about whatever you want to talk about. So I had told them about having an encounter with a Buffalo Hunter drone over North Vietnam. It was just this thing that went flying by me. And I told the intelligence guy, I reported this. They said, okay, we are flying this Buffalo Hunter drone. I actually have a picture of it on my website. I'm in England. I'm telling these guys, I said, strange shit's flying over there. So this guy asks this Air Chief Marshal in charge of intelligence about drones. And they said, well, we're still working on it. And he says, well, that's baloney because we got a Navy guy here who says the American Navy is flying drones over North Vietnam. Well, this is 1972. I enjoyed being able to talk to them about combat, and I really enjoyed talking to the MiG pilots about training in Russia, particularly the Indian, who was so smart. Best questions of anybody in that class. They were all Malaysians and the Indians. It depended where their caste status was. We had two people from Malaysia. One of them was from the royal family, and he could go anywhere. The other guy, Sue, had a Chinese wife, so he was doomed. Oh. They hate the Chinese, so he would never be chief of staff, even though he was by far the sharpest. His wife, when we first started out, she was 4 steps back and 3 to the side, and at the end of the course, she's running around in her husband's shirt. I've never seen such a transition. So we had all this social with the families too. We had a Persian guy who was the Queen's 130 pilot in Iran. It
must have been fascinating to talk to.
It was very interesting talking to all those folks. The Army had a guy from Bulgarian Army. The Israelis were at the Navy College at Greenwich. But that helped me later. I ended up working with Admiral Almog, an Israeli CNO, when I was CO of a ship, and were important. President of the yard was Almog, and he was an Israeli SEAL. Very interesting. So it made you pretty comfortable talking with somebody. But I was talking to the warriors. I'm not interested in the administration. I didn't care about going to Washington and being a 2-star. I was all about, I enjoyed ships and I enjoyed, exercises and doing all that, but I don't care about. We have a group here in Jacksonville, Red Caps, retired captains group, admirals not allowed. They're all people that are either POWs or have 2 06 commands. So our surface guys are DES runs and all CAGs. We have one CO of a carrier who didn't make admiral, which is very unusual. We meet twice a month in that group. It is fantastic. It's none of it's politics, war fighting stuff, current stuff. My buddy Ray, he's staying pretty current. I'm still lolling around in the 72s. I did enjoy being able to conduct, see the jointness work out in 1990. And I was staying in a hotel with Kuwaitis, and the 135 crews were there. And there were some women in there, and they were all in their burqas and stuff. Yep. And Saudis would come in there. Of course, they had Filipinos doing all the work. And they had Pakistanis were at the front. The men would go in there with the women and children behind, and those women and children would go up in the hotel. You never see them again. But I had a room off of one of those off there. I was good. I didn't want to be at the hotels where where the flag officers were. I was pretty happy being amongst the Kuwaitis. But we had a dining room for Americans for the 135 cruise where I was flying US-3s out to the carriers for Riyadh. I'd fly out to the Red Sea and Persian Gulf and talk to the flag officers about the status of Desert Storm planning. Of course, we had air wing guys in Riyadh with a cargo Vice Admiral or Admiral Timmy Wright. He was in Riyadh. My job was a different level from that, but they were doing all the target planning. It was pretty interesting.
My first carrier trip, haze, gray, and underway, was on the John F. Kennedy with Riley Mixon's staff in December of 1990, because I was helping with the planning of all the tanker missions out of Jeddah, which, of course, as you know, the Saratoga and JFK were sucking off of my tankers big time. I was fortunate to have a roommate who was also big time into photography, Dave Parsons. He showed me all the great places to take pictures and everything. But you know what? The Air Force knew very, very little about how the Navy strike planning. And that was really, I'm glad we had many, many months for us to be able to talk with that planning staff and figure out how you guys employ, because once we did it, once the war kicked off, we did it all calm out. But I don't think we could have done that.
The Navy attack, of course, there's a fighter weapons school. So there's also the light attack wing equivalent. This was back then. This is before the Super Hornets were taken over. And say somebody deployed to Vietnam in 1972, the West Coast guys all had been to the school. Some of the East Coast guys had, but still, there was a standardization attempt within the Navy by having a fighter weapons school. The way we're organized with air wings, the individual CAGs. Now, at that time, there was a CAG, and he had been a CO of a squadron, had been screened for a CAG, and he was a senior commander, and one guy. And then the Navy switched and made what was called a super CAG. And there was a deputy CAG and a super CAG. The super CAG was a captain, and he was equivalent to the ops officer of the ship. Then there was the deputy CAG, who basically was the TAC air guy, who would run the F-14s, the A-7s, the A-6s. Ray was a deputy CAG with, and then screened for a senior CAG, and he couldn't do it for social reasons. But no matter what the weapons schools had to say, each CAG was responsible for his tactics. And so there were little differences. There were nuances, air wing to air wing. And that was a big advantage because then the North Vietnamese commanders had no idea what was coming at them. It wasn't quite so in, say, Desert Storm, because Desert Storm was so scripted. There were certain roles for the A7, and the rules of engagement with the 117s was so interesting. So, and I was there. I got involved in the special ops side because when I was commanding officer of the Austin, I had SEAL Team 6 and on my ship for a while. So I kind of had a feel, and we had SEALs embedded in the road from Dhahran to Kuwait City. SEAL, and the Air Force and the Army had their guys that got on the airplane with their hand weapons and landed in Saudi Arabia, and they had nothing. The only well-equipped force were the Marines at Dhahran that had light tanks. So the Schwarzkopf wanted to have chieftains. Okay, so we're ready to go to war in September. September 16th. I was there for that length of time, August to middle of September. Once the airplane was ready to fly, then, of course, we waited until February to get the chieftains there. But Schwarzkopf wanted the tanks in the game, right? He needed the funding to stay in that business. We waited all that time before, but I was there for the first shoot down of a Iraqi airplane. It was by Saudi F-15, but the engagement was from a Marine F-18 from Sheikh Issa, and they didn't want American to shoot down the Iraqi. It was better to have a Saudi do it, and that was kind of interesting. That all took place up off of Kuwait. That was kind of interesting, and of course we did all the communications takeout was all SEAL op, and the SEALs did some interesting work at that and that stuff.
And they still do.
That was the fun side of it, was putting all that together and watching everybody work together. This guy that you know his name, the Air Force guy, the Navy or the Marines needed a bunch of Shrikes or something, and the Air Force had a whole bunch of them. So literally, the Air Force gave the Marines. I mean, this was just ship them over there. Nobody was playing There were political games going on at the General Davis level involving AWACS versus Navy E2s. Navy E2s can do a good job.
And General Horner, the CFAC, was saying, well, the F-15s have got their ability to, IFF and all that kind of stuff, which kind of rubbed the F-14 guys raw, because I've talked to a lot of them. But the 14 at that time period, had some great capabilities too.
Hey, the F-14 could see the 117s.
Yeah.
The burn through for a 117 was the 117s could be seen in the F-14 at like 40 miles.
I didn't know that.
Now, of course, the rules of engagement didn't allow the F-14s to shoot at anybody until the 117s were out of it. Then it was anything flying you could shoot at. Great ROE, but nobody could shoot. And I think those F-14s that looked at them were sneaking the peak. I don't know if they were supposed to turn their radars on, but good.
And of course, you had the Phoenix missile too, which had that long range on the Phoenix. Throw that sucker out there 90 miles.
There was a lot of good stuff. The working at the flag level, the 1-star and below level, it's pretty good. And then once you get to 3 stars, then there's a lot of politics. But
that hasn't changed.
No, and air control will never. Now, Ray, he was in insular Turkey, and he was deconflicting long-range missiles going into Iraq. But there were still lessons. I felt lessons learned. The compartmentalization issue is something that I have a couple of references in there about losing pilots and having to fly the next day, having to be able to do that. Some comments about flying the flight schedule. Politics are meaningless. I mean, nobody ever thought about people complained about, things like not being able to hit SAM sites that have missiles on there, but they flew the mission. I don't know anybody other than Ted Tobin who attacked the wrong ship, the incorrect ship, but we just flew the schedule. I was a department head. I was a maintenance officer in the squadron, and Snuffy Smith, my roommate, was the ops officer. We had those jobs, the crews before, and normally we would have swapped them, and I would have become the ops officer. He would have been. But we were well organized, and we pretty much took the same pilots to the second cruise, not all, but some, and we didn't want to. We were busy enough just planning strikes and flying them. We really didn't have time to do the maintenance. I didn't have time to do the maintenance. Fortunately, the other thing you may find of interest, we took stations 3 and 6 off of the airplane without asking anybody. That was quite a chore. We did that when we went around Cape Town, and we came back. We took 3 and 6 off because we had the TF-30 P408 engine, and the center of gravity was such that we could only carry a 500-pound bomb on that inboard station. And that meant that station was 40 knots of indicated airspeed.
Really?
I'd taken it off. It was a much cleaner airplane without those stations on there. And I have a picture of an A7C without 3 and 6. And so we'd have those MERS out there, and then we'd have a Shrike or something on the outboard station. Yeah. We had nothing between the MER and the side of the airplane. It was much cleaner. And you just put a one bomb on there, it wasn't worth it. So, and we could carry a Sidewinder. I didn't.
Yeah, on the fuselage. Yeah, I remember seeing it. We could have
carried a Sidewinder. We had a fuselage position for it. We didn't ever trained it. And you talk about the Phoenix, the F-8s had the Sparrows. They never carried them. They were Sidewinders and guns. Of course, unfortunately, the F-4 didn't have a gun, so they couldn't fire, which was just ridiculous, not having guns in a fighter. But,
and that's what everybody says too. Like the F-8 was the last gunfighting jet that the Navy had until, the F-14 came around and had M61 Vulcan cannon in it too,
What a great gun.
Oh, it is. It's still being used today, for crying out loud,
Sure. Yeah, it's a good gun. Well, the CWIS is kind of like it, on the close-in weapon system.
Oh, that is one of the most unique sounds I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Other than maybe the A-10 gun, is the sound of the CWIS. And I remember being on a carrier once where they were testing it, and there were training crews on the CWIS. Yeah. And you just hear that.
The destroyers off of Yemen are actually shooting drones down with it.
Yeah. And they've been shooting down rockets and everything inland with those things too. So, I mean, just crazy stuff. So,
I learned about, if you're in the military for a career and you're deciding what you want to do, there's warriors out there and there's not. We have a problem. We first get into a war, we find we have a lot of politicians out there in the key warfighting, and it takes a while to get the warfighters up there to those decision-making positions. Fortunately, in Vietnam, we had the President of the United States deciding what targets to do on Tuesdays at lunch. So I do talk a little bit about the politics, and people don't realize how good Nixon was. And like when somebody like Kissinger says in the White House years, no president of the United States ever had a feeling for the international, and Nixon's ability to pit China and Russia against each other at the end of the Vietnam War.
Genius.
Incredible how that was going on. And there were things going on like in 71. I point this out in the memoir too. We're in 71 doing a med cruise, but Nixon is working the Chinese. And then he actually has a Chinese trip while we're up. So, and one of our bombing pauses was due to that trip. And you say, well, it ended up working pretty well. But anyway, I am very fortunate because I was able to be a Navy carrier pilot in the Vietnam era where formation flying was important. And it was fun all the way through. When I SEAL Squadron, we never came back without doing diamond formation acrobatics. It's important for the idea that Blue Angels are just F-18 pilots from squadrons. I mean, they're not going to pick the worst people, but they could pick probably 2 or 3 out of any squadron. And I'm anxious to see how the female number 2 does.
The Thunderbirds.
I've flown with a bunch of women in Navy A4s. Let me tell you, they're good pilots. The ones that I've met, damn good.
I've flown with a lot of them. I interviewed a gal who flew with the Thunderbirds. They've had several gals flying with the Thunderbirds. No big deal. Yeah. They're just as good as everybody else. I think
the ergonomics for women, I think women have a better G tolerance than men do anyway. There's some truth to that. Yeah. Well, I don't think any questions pop up out of this. Where we go from here,
You know what? And like I said, we've been going for 2 hours and 15 minutes, brother. Yeah. And I'm not going to keep you any longer. Bo, this has been fantastic, though.
Well, I hope so.
I've learned so much things in the Vietnam War that I'd never heard of before, like tossing a Mark 20 Rockeye. I'd never heard that before. Yeah. Having you explain Iron Hand, and again, great lessons learned from relationships. People that you knew in the Vietnam War, Snuffy Smith, and look where he ends up. Just fantastic stuff. And compartmentalization. Boy, isn't that the truth, man? You just put all that stuff out of your head.
But I talk a little about, I call it a type of PTSD that's called emotional numbness. And I don't feel when people die. I feel grief. I felt grief when my dog died. Yeah. But people, I just kind of, I just got to go with it. And I can operate through it. I'm not going to get hysterical about it. Yeah. And I can make decisions through stress. And you learn that Miller Dietrich, who was one of the 10, says, what do you do in an A4 when you have a problem? You wind the 10-day clock. You put your elbows on the canopy rail and you just take a few breaths because you don't want to screw up the first maneuver. You just learn how to do it. So when things get bad, you find that people who are in the military are going to run into the fire out of it. And I just think that's a lesson learned. I don't know that it's a good one in the civilian world, but at least you can make decisions. But there certainly is a warrior class as opposed to a political class in the military. Of course, in peacetime, the political guys seem to. I watched. They're going to give Putin. Oh, cluster bombs are a war crime now. Give me a break. Yeah. Cluster bombs are the way to go.
For certain missions, certain targets, you better believe.
Yeah.
CBU is the way to do it.
Ukrainians are using them as appropriate. Just this idea of, like, after World War I, they decided it was a bad idea to have submarines. Not a good move. But anyway, I learned a lot. So I'm enjoying not just observing, but in my groups, my monthly Association of Naval Aviation lunch, but the Red Caps group, to getting to talk to surface guys. And one of the guys in our group, he now passed away recently at 102, was in the first submarine in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. So, and to be able to talk to those kind of people, just amazing. Just.
And brother, that's why I had you on, being able to talk to you, because we've heard incredible stories today. And so I appreciate you coming on. Okay.
Well, enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.
I really enjoyed spending time with Bo Smith on this show. I'm trying to get in contact with a lot more Vietnam vets. They have incredible stories. Next week's show is with John D. Markle, a MiG killer from the Vietnam War during the 1972 Linebacker campaign, flying in the famous Oyster Flight on the 10th of May. There was a lot of MiGs up that day, a lot of MiG kills that day. And he tells a really interesting story about that. Just interviewed Chuck de Bellevue, the highest scoring ace with 6 kills of the Vietnam War. He's going to be on in a couple weeks. I'm doing all the editing for those shows now. Wait till you hear these stories. I mean, they're just fantastic. As always, the Lessons from the Cockpit show is brought to you and is financially supported by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. Please, folks, go by and take a look at these. These are really exhaustively researched profile prints, 4, 6, and 8 feet on vinyl that you can peel off and stick to any surface. We're pretty sure that they're waterproof, not that you'd put a 4-footer on your truck, but all of the patches that we've done, many people have put on their vehicles. There's 143 ready-to-print profile views that you can go to at wallpilot.com. They start at 4-footer at $99, an 8-footer is $159. If there's a favorite airplane that you want with your name on it, tail number, and custom weapons load on it, we can do that for you, and you can fill out a form on wallpilot.com, and we can start on that. These are very exhaustively researched, like I said. There's stenciling on the missiles, on the aircraft. I appreciate you going by and taking a look at wallpilot.com. Thanks once again, folks, for being with us today. It was great to have Bo Smith on. We're going to do Vietnam vets, and we've got a gentleman who runs an FBO at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Port City Air, who is also going to be on in a few weeks. Thanks for downloading these. You can find all of these on the website at lessonsfromthecockpit.show, and we'll talk to you again next week.